The fluorescent lights hum at precisely 60 Hz, a sound that most people stop hearing after the first week. Danielle Ross hears it every single shift. She arrives at Oak Creek Memorial at 6:47 in the morning, 13 minutes before her official start, because the chaos of the 7 a.m. changeover is easier to navigate when you're already moving. The parking garage smells like diesel exhaust and wet concrete. Her scrubs are navy blue, standard issue, pockets deliberately emptied except for a pen and a bandage scissors she's owned for 12 years. She clips her badge to her collar as she walks through the staff entrance. The badge photo is 5 years old, blonde hair pulled back, neutral expression, eyes that give away nothing. A nurse manager named Patricia sees her pass the break room and waves, but Danielle just nods and keeps moving. There's a rhythm to invisibility. You don't sit in break rooms. You don't linger near groups. You answer direct questions with brief answers that don't invite follow-up. When Patricia asked last month where she'd worked before Jacksonville, Danielle said a few places and turned back to her charting. The ER is already electric with a Sunday night bleed-through, patients who've been waiting since midnight, families who smell like coffee and frustration, the kind of energy that makes most people's pulse quicken. Danielle's heart rate stays at 62. She picks up her assignment sheet from the charge nurse, sees she's been assigned bays 2 through 5, and begins her mental map of what's coming. 2 hours of controlled mayhem before the true weight of the shift settles in. Bay 2, 74-year-old with chest pain, EKG already pulled, troponin pending. Bay 3, 32-year-old motor vehicle accident, multiple contusions, X-rays running. Bay 4, empty but flagged for incoming trauma. Bay 5, migraine, probably a drug-seeking patient, but Danielle treats everyone the same because pain is pain and judgment is a luxury she stopped affording herself in 2011. Dr. Marcus Caldwell enters the ER at 7:03 a.m. like a man walking into a room he owns. He's 48, always in pressed slacks and a white coat that he keeps draped over his shoulders like a cape. His watch is a Rolex Submariner, $14,000 new, maybe $11,000 on the secondary market. He doesn't wear it for the time. He wears it so people know he can afford it. His father was a federal judge. His mother was a surgeon at Johns Hopkins. He's the chief of medicine at Oak Creek because he knows how to smile at hospital board members and because his med school roommate is now on that board. Caldwell moves through the ER and his eyes land on Danielle as she's taking vitals on the chest pain patient in Bay 2. She doesn't look up. Her hands move with mechanical precision, blood pressure cuff, oximeter, temporal thermometer. The patient, a man named Harold with silver stubble and a wedding ring worn smooth by 60 years of use, watches Danielle's face for reassurance. She gives him a small smile. Not fake. Just proportional to the moment. The smile of someone who has held dying people and survived them. Caldwell stands in the doorway watching. His jaw tightens almost imperceptibly. What he sees is a nurse performing her job with what looks like complete confidence. What makes him uncomfortable is that she doesn't perform it for him. She doesn't glance over to check if he's watching. She doesn't adjust her technique based on his presence. She works as though he doesn't exist, with a kind of quiet authority that belongs to people who've made decisions that actually mattered. Get an EKG stat, Danielle says to the nursing assistant, her voice pitched low enough that it's not an order, it's an observation that needs confirming. Already done. 3 minutes ago, the assistant responds. Good. Danielle documents without pause. I'll be back in 2 minutes with the troponin results. She doesn't run. She walks. The difference is subtle but noticeable. Running suggests panic, walking suggests control. Caldwell watches her navigate the central station with the ease of someone who knows exactly where the troponin analyzer is, exactly how long it will take, exactly what the normal range is. She pulls the results, reads them with a micro-expression that lasts less than a second, normal, which means Harold is probably fine, which means she can already move her mental focus to the next patient. By 8:30, the shift has entered the part that separates competent nurses from the others. The waiting room is full. 3 ambulances are inbound. The lady in Bay 3 is becoming increasingly agitated about discharge time, even though her x-rays show a fractured tibia. Danielle moves between bays with what looks like effortless choreography but requires the kind of situational awareness that comes from having paid attention in places most people would find unthinkable. The break room at 8:45 is where the problem becomes visible. Danielle pushes through the door with her coffee cup in one hand. The room goes quiet. Not gradually. Immediately. 3 nurses and a resident who were laughing about something on someone's phone, Jessica, Mark, and Dr. Brennan, simply stop. The laughter cuts off mid-word like someone unplugged the speakers. Danielle pours her coffee. Black. No sugar, no cream. The sound of liquid hitting ceramic is loud in the silence. Someone outside the break room is talking about admit rates. The fluorescent lights continue their 60 Hz hum. She takes a sip and moves toward the refrigerator to retrieve her lunch, a Tupperware container of grilled chicken and rice that she prepared Sunday afternoon. The silence stretches for exactly 9 seconds. She can feel it the way some people feel weather changes. The room is deliberate now. The quiet is intentional. Mark and Jessica have both found their phones suddenly fascinating. Dr. Brennan is reading something on his tablet that clearly requires absolute concentration. Danielle sits at the break room table with her lunch. She opens the container. She doesn't acknowledge the silence because acknowledging it would mean admitting it exists, and admitting it exists would mean giving it power. Instead, she eats with the kind of steady focus she'd use in any other situation. 2 forks of chicken. A sip of coffee. Another fork of rice. Her hands are steady. Her breathing is steady. Her pulse, if anyone were monitoring it, would still be 62. So, Jessica says into the silence, her voice pitched higher than before, did anyone see the game last night? No one answers. Mark's eyes are on his phone screen. Dr. Brennan's tablet is held at an angle that makes actual reading impossible. The question was performative, a test of the silence, and it fails spectacularly. Jessica's neck flushes pink and she looks away. Danielle finishes her lunch in 7 minutes. She places her fork in the empty container, caps it, stands, and walks to the sink. She rinses the fork slowly under warm water, soap under her fingernails, then the fork again. The water runs clear. She places everything in the drying rack. She doesn't acknowledge the 3 people still sitting in the room. She simply leaves. What makes it worse for Caldwell, watching from his office, is that she doesn't leave quickly. She doesn't rush away in embarrassment. She leaves as though she's finished her task and is moving on to the next thing. As though the silence was irrelevant. As though their collective rejection was the equivalent of background noise, worth the same attention as the fluorescent lights. He understands, in that moment, that this is going to be more complicated than usual. By 10 a.m., the ER has shifted into crisis mode. The first ambulance arrival is a 38-year-old man who collided with a delivery truck at the intersection of San Marco Avenue and Atlantic Boulevard. Paramedics report abdominal trauma, possible internal bleeding, consciousness maintained but altered. The guy's name is Robert. He has a tattoo on his neck that says Semper Fi in block letters and a blood pressure of 92/56. Danielle is already moving before the stretcher hits the bay doors. She's reading the paramedic report from the iPad even as they're transferring the patient onto the hospital bed, mechanism of injury, vitals every 2 minutes, what they've already administered. 2 units of normal saline in the field. No significant head injury. Abdomen distended and rigid. This is the kind of patient that separates the moment you can help from the moment you can only manage. I need labs, type and cross for 4 units, and CT abdomen and pelvis with 4 contrast, she tells the resident, a second-year named Dr. Patel who's standing at the foot of the bed looking uncertain. Foley catheter. Keep 2 large bore 4s, I'm going to need immediate access. She's already wrapping the blood pressure cuff, already reaching for the ultrasound probe, already making the kind of decisions that require knowing exactly what you're doing. Her hands don't shake. Her voice doesn't waver. She's calm in the way that comes from having made these decisions before, in places where the alternative to being calm was people dying. Caldwell stands in the observation window of Bay 4, watching. He watches her place the ultrasound probe on Robert's abdomen with perfect technique, watches her identify what looks like a significant hemoperitoneum in approximately 4 seconds, watches her call out surgical consult, now into the phone with the kind of authority that makes surgeons actually answer. He watches her continue placing lines and drawing blood and preparing the patient for what's probably going to be an emergency operating room, all while Robert is asking if his wife called the hospital yet, all while her face remains the carefully neutral expression of someone who has learned that emotion is a luxury. What makes Caldwell's hands curl into fists is that the attending is going to have to agree with every assessment she's just made. The CT will confirm the bleed. The surgical team will take the patient directly to the OR. Danielle will have initiated exactly the right interventions in exactly the right order, and there's nothing Caldwell can do about it except acknowledge it. Except there is something he can do. He can make sure nobody else forgets that she works for him. He can make sure the break room stays silent when she enters. He can make sure her competence is never translated as anything other than presumption. He can make sure she learns that in his hospital, confidence belongs to people with titles, and nurses, even nurses who move like people who've trained in places most people don't know exist, are supposed to defer. He pulls out his phone and texts his former med school roommate, the hospital board president. One sentence: we need to discuss performance standards and protocol adherence among nursing staff. The message sends at 10:42 a.m. By 10:44, the response comes back: drinks Thursday. The machinery of institutional power has already begun to turn. And Danielle Ross, still focused on her patient, still moving with the kind of precision that comes from 12 years and 3 tours of places that don't appear on official maps, still wearing the faded unit patch sewn inside her jacket lining against skin and bone, has no idea that the silence in the break room was just the beginning. The machinery of institutional power operates on schedule. By Thursday morning, Dr. Caldwell had already positioned himself in Bay 7, arms crossed, watching Danielle assess a 17-year-old girl doubled over with abdominal pain. The girl's mother sat in the plastic chair, purse clutched against her chest, eyes red from crying. Danielle's hands moved with practiced efficiency, palpation of the right lower quadrant, checking for rebound tenderness, noting the involuntary guarding of the abdominal wall. She'd seen this pattern 847 times. Maybe more. The presentation was textbook. Appendicitis. The kind of thing you don't miss when you've spent 12 years making decisions that meant the difference between a soldier breathing and a soldier in a flag-folded box. Doctor, her white count came back at 14,200, Danielle said quietly, holding up the lab result. Rebound tenderness is positive. She needs imaging before we... The door swung open hard enough to bang against the wall. Dr. Caldwell stormed in, his presence filling the bay like dark water rising in a basement. His face was already flushed, his voice pitched to carry across 3 rooms. Nurse Ross, your triage protocol here is completely inappropriate. This patient should have been discharged to urgent care, not occupying MY emergency bay. He didn't look at the girl. He was looking at Danielle. Watching her face for a flinch. For anything that looked like breaking. The girl's mother stood up. Danielle took one measured breath. The kind of breath you take before you speak to someone in a language they need to understand. When you've learned that composure is a weapon and silence is armor. Doctor, her rebound tenderness and elevated white count suggest appendicitis. A single tear escaped down her cheek. She wiped it away without breaking her gaze. Dr. Caldwell's face went rigid. His jaw tightened. For a moment, maybe 2 seconds, maybe 3, he looked like someone who'd just realized the ground beneath him was solid rock, not the sand he'd been standing on. He opened his mouth. Closed it. Then he turned and walked out of the bay, movement stiff, controlled, the way a man moves when he's trying very hard not to run. The girl's mother sat back down slowly. Her hand trembled as she reached for her daughter's shoulder. That took. She needs an ultrasound, Danielle said, her voice back to its normal register, no trace of anything except clinical competence. Let's get her to imaging. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part happened on Friday morning in the break room. Danielle pushed through the door and conversation stopped mid-sentence. Not gradually. All at once. Like someone had hit a mute button. Dr. Caldwell sat in the corner with 3 residents, second-year residents who had their whole careers ahead of them, which meant they understood the calculus of power, which meant they understood that being near Danielle Ross was now a liability. When she entered, they immediately stood. Not quickly. Not obviously. They just stood, gathered their lunch containers, and left through the side door without eye contact. The room was empty except for her. She made herself a cup of coffee. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, that sound that gets into your bones after a while, like the hum of a helicopter idle waiting for orders. She sat at the table, pulled out her lunch container, and ate slowly. Chewing each bite precisely. Maintaining perfect posture. Hand steady. The kind of calm that comes from having already survived the worst. The room stayed empty. 3 days of this. Break room conversations that stopped when she appeared. Hallway clusters that dissolved when she approached. The weight of institutional silence pressing down like a hand on her sternum. That Friday afternoon, Caldwell posted the written warning on the unit board where everyone could see it. Where the girl's mother couldn't miss it. Where the residents could read it and understand the cost of being visible to someone he'd decided to erase. The document was formatted in official hospital letterhead, St. John's Medical Administrative Protocol, and cited insubordination concerns and failure to respect hierarchical protocols. Nothing specific. Nothing that could be challenged in a court or a review board. Just enough vagueness to make the accusation feel true to everyone reading it, which was the entire point. Danielle read it standing completely still. Her jaw tightened the same way Caldwell's had tightened in Bay 7. She reached up and touched the patch hidden in her jacket lining, the faded unit insignia from 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, Dark Horse, the fabric rough against her fingertips, the only thing in her possession that carried her real name, and then she walked back to work without a word. By Friday evening, the undercurrent had become something else entirely. Something visible. When Danielle walked into the staff lounge, residents stood and left. When she entered a patient's room, the attending physician suddenly found reasons to be elsewhere. The nursing supervisor had been briefed, Caldwell had made sure of that, and suddenly there were new protocols requiring Danielle to document patient interactions in triplicate, to submit triage assessments to nursing review before passing them to physicians, to attend a mandatory communication excellence seminar that only she had been asked to take. Each policy was reasonable on its surface. Individually harmless. Together they formed a system designed to slow her down, to make her work harder, to make her visible in all the wrong ways. She endured it without protest. Without complaint. She simply worked. Documented more. Submitted assessments. Attended the seminar and listened to someone talk about hierarchy and respect for physician authority. The other nurses watched her. Some with sympathy. Some with the careful distance of people protecting themselves. This was how institutional power worked. Not through dramatic confrontations. Through the slow, patient accumulation of small humiliations. Through systems. Through silence. The day crept forward. The ER filled with the usual mix of human pain, chest pain and allergic reactions, broken bones and suicidal ideation, the endless stream of bodies requiring competence, requiring care, requiring someone to know what they were doing. Danielle moved through it all with the precision of someone operating from muscle memory. 8 years since Bagram. 8 years of burying that part of herself. 8 years of being just a nurse, and apparently 8 years wasn't enough to make her forget how to carry weight. How to lead without title. How to look at a problem and solve it while everyone around her was frozen. The evening shift was quiet until 10:44 p.m. That's when the automatic doors exploded open and the world tilted. The automatic doors exploded open and the world tilted. A man filled the entrance, 300 pounds of muscle and rage wrapped in tactical gear, a Glock 19 in his trembling right hand, his face contorted like he was screaming underwater. His voice came out as a roar, a sound that bent the fluorescent light and made it cringe. My chest, somebody help me, my chest is, he couldn't finish. The words collapsed like his breathing. The ER went liquid. A nurse at the intake desk stumbled backward into a crash cart. An elderly patient waiting for discharge dove behind the chairs in the lobby. A resident grabbed a supply cart as a shield. The security guard actually moved backward, one step, then another, his hand hovering near his radio but not pressing it. Nobody moved toward the man. Everybody moved away. Danielle stood up from the nurse's station and started walking. Not running. Not calling for backup. Not reaching for an alarm. Walking toward 300 pounds of armed crisis with her hands visible and empty, palms outward like she was greeting an old friend. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed their electric anxiety, but her breathing stayed level. In through her nose. Out through her mouth. The kind of calm that comes from having already survived the worst. Hey, she said. Just that. Just her voice, steady as a metronome, dropping into the register below the screaming. Hey, I see you. Look at me. The man's eyes found hers. They were wild, rolling, the pupils blown wide, but for a fraction of a second something anchored. A human recognizing another human. What's your name? Danielle kept her voice in that same measured octave, each word a small promise that the world wasn't entirely broken. Tyler. The word came out shattered. Tyler, I am my chest, something's wrong, I can't. Tyler, I'm going to help you. She was 15 feet from him now, her body language open, non-threatening, the way you'd approach a spooked horse. Not like he had a gun. Like he was just a person in terrible pain. But I need you to keep looking at me while we talk. Can you do that? Tyler's breathing was getting worse. Danielle heard it immediately, the way the air moved through his lungs, asymmetric, the left side practically silent while the right side heaved like he was drowning in slow motion. His neck muscles were standing out in sharp relief, and his jaw was working without words coming out, his whole face clenched around the sensation of something collapsing inside him. Tension pneumothorax. The diagnosis crystallized in her mind with the weight of hard certainty. A collapsed lung pressing against the heart. Every breath made it worse. The trachea was deviating, she could see it now, the slight curve of his neck, the way his windpipe was being shoved toward the opposite side of his chest by the pressure of the air pocket crushing his lung. Jugular vein distended like a rope pulled taut. His skin was starting to take on that grayish quality of a body not getting enough oxygen, and his breathing was moving into the rapid, desperate rhythm of a nervous system in full rebellion. 60 seconds left before his blood pressure crashed. Maybe 90 if he was lucky. If his heart decided to keep beating through the mechanical pressure of a lung collapsing inside his own chest cavity. Tyler, I need you to sit down right now. Danielle's voice changed registers, not louder, but more precise, the way a surgeon's voice becomes sharper in the operating room. Your lung is collapsing. I can fix it, but you have to sit down. Now. Tyler tried to take a step toward her and his legs just gave out. He collapsed to his knees like a building losing its structural integrity, the gun clattering away across the tile floor with a sound like a dropped hammer. A security officer scrambled for it, but Danielle was already moving, catching Tyler before he hit the ground, her arm around his shoulders, her other hand already reaching for his tactical vest. The MRE package wrapper was right there, tucked into the front of his gear where soldiers kept the small things they needed in fast hands. The tan plastic pouch, thick enough to hold its shape, the kind that came with meals, ready to eat from any deployment anywhere on the planet. Danielle had seen 1,000 of them. She'd carried them herself across sand that tried to bury you. Her hands moved on their own. 12 years of training doesn't sit in your hands waiting for permission. It just lives there, muscle memory written into the fibers like scar tissue. She tore the wrapper free from his vest, felt the waxy paper resist and then give, got it to her fingers, and ripped it to size, a 4x4 roughly, the dimensions already in her hands before her conscious mind confirmed them. The medical tape was in her right pocket where it always was. She got 2 strips free, her movements economical and fast, not hurried but efficient, and she located the second intercostal space, midclavicular line, the anatomical landmark burned into every trauma med who'd ever had to decompress a chest. Tyler's skin was clammy and cooling, his breathing now so shallow it was barely breathing at all, just the machinery of a body in its final desperation. She pressed the MRE wrapper over the wound site and taped it down. The plastic sealed against his skin with a soft adhesive whisper. 30 seconds. The lung was already starting to re-expand, the pressure finally having somewhere to release, the air pocket deflating back into its natural state as the impromptu one-way valve did its work. Air could escape outward through the wrapper but couldn't flow back in, the basic physics of survival written on a food package that had traveled halfway around the world. Tyler's eyes rolled back. His full 300-pound weight went limp in her arms, his breathing still ragged but deeper now, the panic draining away as his body realized it wasn't dying anymore. Danielle lowered him carefully to the floor, her hands already signaling for paramedics, but they were already moving, already appearing with the stretcher, already running the calculations of a save happening in real time. 90 seconds, someone whispered. She didn't know who. Maybe herself. The paramedics had him. The medical machinery of transfer began, vitals being called out, for lines established, the stretcher locked down, the organized chaos of a crisis that had just become manageable instead of fatal. Tyler was alive. His lung was re-expanding. His oxygen saturation was climbing back toward survivable numbers. Danielle stepped back and let the system take him. Her hands were already dropping to her sides, her posture already returning to neutral, the crisis mode switching off like a light with a switch. Around her, the ER was coming back online, nurses returning to their stations, the elderly patient being helped out from behind the chairs, the resident lowering the supply cart like it was a shield he no longer needed. Dr. Marcus Caldwell emerged from the medication room, where he'd locked himself behind a door that required a key card he definitely possessed. His face was white. Not from fear, from rage. His eyes tracked Danielle as she moved back toward the nurse's station, her scrub still pristine, her movements already returning to their normal rhythm, just another Friday night where someone didn't die. But that wasn't the worst part. What happened next changed everything. Dr. Caldwell pulled out his personal cell phone and turned away from the crowd, his jaw set, his fingers already dialing a number that had been memorized years ago in a different life, when he and the hospital board president were throwing beer cans off a fraternity roof together at Duke. He didn't look at Danielle again. He didn't need to. He'd seen what she was, what she could do, and in the fluorescent light of Oak Creek Memorial, that competence looked less like heroism and more like a threat. Within an hour, he was in the security office, his voice calm and institutional as he explained to the night shift supervisor that the footage from the ER entrance was experiencing some kind of equipment malfunction. A glitch. The kind of thing that happened in older systems. Unfortunate timing. Such a shame. By midnight, the witnesses had already been reassigned to different floors. The incident report was being rewritten with careful strategic language about protocol violations and unauthorized interventions, the language of liability rather than the truth of a collapsed lung reinflating in real time. Danielle was already gone, heading home through rain that hammered the parking lot like applause for something she couldn't celebrate, unaware that the man whose life she'd saved was already becoming inconvenient, a complication in the narrative that was being rewritten in real time by someone with institutional power and absolutely nothing left to lose. The real nightmare was only just beginning. Dr. Caldwell remained in the medication room for exactly 4 minutes after Danielle walked past with the patient, his hand frozen on the lock button. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like insects trapped in glass. He watched the monitors through the small window, oxygen saturation climbing, heart rate stabilizing, a life being saved by someone who had no right to step outside protocol. Someone who had made him look incompetent in front of witnesses. Someone who had smiled at him with that quiet certainty that meant she knew exactly what she was doing, and worse, that she didn't need his approval to do it. His phone was in his pocket before the patient's eyes closed. The board president answered on the second ring, they always did for Caldwell. 17 years of med school together, 15 years of hospital board meetings, and a golf partnership that had never once been interrupted by something as trivial as a Friday night crisis. The voice on the other end was warm. Familiar. Dangerous. Marcus. It's late. It's a situation, Caldwell said, keeping his voice level, reasonable, the voice of a concerned administrator. We had a security breach tonight. Armed intruder, tactical gear, weapons. The ER protocols exist for a reason, and one of our nurses, well, she's relatively new, and she panicked. Took matters into her own hands. Violated lockdown, endangered staff and other patients. He paused, letting that sink in. I managed the crisis, but she created a dangerous situation that could have resulted in casualties. The silence on the other end lasted 3 seconds. Then, which nurse? Danielle Ross. Came to us about 2 years ago. Competent enough clinically, but concerning judgment patterns. This incident confirms what I've been documenting. By 11 p.m., the incident report had been rewritten. Danielle's quick thinking became an authorized intervention. Her recognition of tension pneumothorax became lucky guess that happened to work. The chest seal improvisation, the thing that had actually reinflated Tyler's lung, the move that required field medicine knowledge most civilian nurses never possessed, was reduced to used available materials without proper decontamination protocol. Every word was technically true but arranged like a condemned building, each brick placed to support the conclusion that she had been reckless, not brilliant. That she had endangered lives, not saved them. By midnight, Caldwell had made 3 more calls. The first witness, the respiratory therapist who had watched Danielle calmly de-escalate a 300-pound armed man in 90 seconds, received an email offering the preferred evening shift he'd been requesting for 6 months. The second witness, the attending who had frozen while Danielle worked, suddenly found himself scheduled for administrative duties that would keep him away from the ER for the next week. The third witness, a nurse who had documented exactly what she saw, received a call from HR about shifting departmental needs and was reassigned to pediatrics, 3 floors up, effective immediately. No explanation. Just a change in the system that made correlation impossible. The security footage disappeared into a file labeled Corrupted IT Investigating. Caldwell was good at this part. Strategic. Patient. He didn't yell or threaten. He simply moved pieces across the board with the precision of someone who understood that institutional power didn't need drama, it needed inevitability. By 7 a.m., Tyler was stable in the ICU, his lung fully reinflated, his respiratory function improving by the hour. He would survive because of what Danielle had done. But he never saw her conscious, never got to thank her, never got to tell his story while it was still fresh and powerful. The isolation was beautifully executed. At 9 a.m., Danielle's phone rang. The board president's voice was sympathetic, which made it worse. Danielle, I'm calling with difficult news. We've reviewed the incident report from last night's crisis. There are significant concerns about your judgment and adherence to protocol. The decision has been made to terminate your employment effective immediately for gross negligence and protocol violations. Security will escort you out at noon. HR will mail your final check and separation paperwork. She didn't speak. Couldn't. The words were landing but not connecting, as if they were being spoken in a language she'd forgotten how to translate. We appreciate your service, but we have to prioritize patient safety above all else. She hung up. By 11 a.m., she was in her car in the parking garage, level B2, in a spot that had been hers for 18 months. The engine was off. Her forehead rested against the steering wheel. Her hands lay motionless in her lap, palms up, the hands that had held countless lives together, improvised equipment from nothing, moved with precision under fire. Now they were just hands that couldn't turn a key. 40 minutes. That's how long she sat there. 18 years of hiding. 18 years of rebuilding herself into someone small and invisible and harmless. 18 years of honoring the orders, never surface, never mention it, your service at Bagram no longer exists, Major Danielle Ross is a ghost, you are only a nurse now, only a civilian. She had done everything they asked. She had become so small that a man like Caldwell could barely see her. She had been so careful, so deferential, so utterly committed to disappearing that not even her own competence could betray her. And it had still not been enough. The weight pressed down on her skull like a physical thing, not despair exactly, something harder and colder than that. The weight of Bagram, of the 14 casualties she'd pulled from that burning compound under fire, of the operation that was classified so high that officially it had never happened. The weight of being erased. Of being ordered to forget herself. Of sitting in hospital break rooms for 18 years while no one asked her name or where she came from or why she moved with such unusual calm under crisis. Tears ran down her face onto her scrubs. She didn't wipe them. She sat motionless, breathing in the stale air of the parking garage, the smell of diesel exhaust and old concrete, the sound of distant footsteps that belonged to people who still had jobs. The next morning, her locker in the ER was half empty, personal items already boxed, the shelves that had been hers now blank and available for the next person, the next temporary nurse who would learn quickly not to ask too many questions about Danielle Ross. She was placing the last box on top of the others when the staff entrance doors slammed open hard enough that everyone in the break room looked up. Her 17-year-old son Marcus stood in the ER entrance, breathing hard, his hands shaking as he held a wooden shadow box. His voice cracked when he spoke. "Mom. They need to see these. I don't care what you were ordered to do." The ER went dead silent. The kind of silence that happens in hospitals when someone has just stepped outside every protocol, every expectation, every carefully maintained boundary. Marcus opened the shadow box with trembling hands. Oak leaves. Bronze star with Valor. Purple heart. Army Commendation Medal with combat device. A reflection of a life that had been officially erased, now impossible to ignore. Danielle's eyes closed for exactly 1 second. When they opened, something had shifted. That afternoon, Dr. Marcus Caldwell sat in the television studio's makeup chair while a technician powdered his forehead, erasing the shine of anxiety with practice strokes. His tie was Italian silk. His hair had been styled 40 minutes ago. He had prepared for this moment since Danielle's body was still warm in her car, since her son had shattered 18 years of institutional erasure with a shadow box and the kind of truth that couldn't be unspoken. The anchor, local news, 6 o'clock slot, 200,000 viewers, smiled at him from across the table with the false warmth of someone about to ask uncomfortable questions. Caldwell smiled back. He'd handled board inquiries before. He'd managed reputations. Control was simply a matter of narrative. "We'll live in 90 seconds, someone said, and Caldwell checked his reflection one more time, the face of a man who made difficult decisions for patient safety, who had to let personal feelings take a backseat to institutional integrity, who regretted nothing. The red light blinked. The anchor leaned forward slightly, and her first question was soft, understanding, the kind of setup that allowed a man to explain himself with dignity. Caldwell had been expecting this. "Dr. Caldwell, you made the difficult decision to terminate Nurse Ross's employment. Walk us through that process." His voice was warm as oil. "Personnel decisions are always difficult, but patient safety must come first. Nurse Ross, despite her past service which we deeply respect, violated critical protocols that afternoon. She engaged an armed individual without waiting for law enforcement, she improvised a medical intervention without proper authorization, and she put herself and others at unnecessary risk. The protocols exist to protect everyone." He paused, letting concern cross his face. "We cannot allow emotion to override procedure, no matter how well-intentioned the actions." The anchor nodded, making a note. Then her hand moved to her earpiece, and something shifted in her expression. "We have someone calling in. It's a Pentagon spokesperson." Caldwell's mouth remained smiling. His chest tightened slightly. Pentagon was a detail that shouldn't exist in this narrative. "Please hold. This is unusual for our show, but we're taking the call." The line crackled. A new voice entered the broadcast, male, calm as ice water, military cadence in the syllables. "This is Major Andrew Pierce, Pentagon Public Affairs. I'm calling regarding the classified service record of Major Danielle Ross, who was terminated from her position at Oak Creek Memorial yesterday. Caldwell's smile froze. The camera was still on his face. He could feel it, could feel the red light, could feel 200,000 people in Jacksonville's living rooms watching his expression as his narrative disintegrated. The voice continued, each word like a scalpel. Major Ross completed 12 years of active duty with the 75th Ranger Regiment. Her final deployment was a classified medical evacuation operation at Bagram Airfield in June 2010 under direct JSOC command. During that operation, she led her team under heavy fire to extract 14 American service members from a burning forward operating base. One medic attempted to trigger a detonation device as she approached. She sustained life-threatening injuries, hence the Purple Heart, while securing the zone and performing emergency triage. She saved every person in that building. Caldwell's fingers were curling slightly. The makeup on his forehead would be catching the studio lights in a way that made him look panicked. Dr. Caldwell, the Pentagon voice said, and now it carried an edge like a racked slide on a 9mm, obtained fraudulent testimony from staff members, systematically falsified the incident report from yesterday's ER emergency, and intimidated witnesses to prevent corroboration. We have recordings of his phone call to the hospital board president, his former medical school roommate, containing demonstrable lies about Major Ross's conduct. We have security footage of Dr. Caldwell entering the surveillance office at 2:27 a.m. to corrupt the incident record. We have signed statements from 4 hospital employees describing his explicit threats regarding their employment if they corroborated Nurse Ross's actions. The silence in the studio was the kind that happens when a structure collapses. The kind you can hear. Do you have a response, Doctor? Caldwell's mouth opened. Nothing emerged. His eyes were locked on the camera, on the red light, on the 200,000 people now understanding that the man they were looking at had systematically destroyed a decorated veteran's career. His jaw worked silently. The anchor waited. The Pentagon voice had already disconnected. Caldwell's voice cracked. I wasn't aware of classified. The information is no longer classified, the anchor said, her tone shifted now, no longer understanding, now distant. The Pentagon has declassified Major Ross's service record specifically to address your statements. Doctor, did you or did you not attempt to interfere with the incident report? He couldn't answer. By that evening, the state medical board had announced a formal investigation into his conduct. By Monday morning, his medical license was suspended pending review. The hospital board released a statement condemning his actions in language so measured and ruthless it sounded like a eulogy. His phone stopped ringing. His office, the one with the mahogany desk and the view of the river, was quietly cleaned out by security staff who didn't meet his eyes. The hierarchy he had weaponized, the network of power he had cultivated, the alliances he thought were permanent, all of it turned on him with the precision of a machine designed to crush anyone who broke the code. The code was simple: you protected your own. You didn't destroy a soldier who'd saved lives. You didn't manipulate records. You didn't let ambition eat through institutional integrity like acid through tissue paper. Caldwell had broken every unwritten rule that held the hospital together, and the institution responded by erasing him from the only universe he understood. 6 months later, Danielle walked through the main entrance of Oak Creek Memorial wearing a tailored charcoal suit and a name badge that read Chief Nursing Officer. The position came with a corner office, a staff of 12, and the kind of authority she had been deliberately denied for 18 years. She moved through the ER with her head level, meeting the eyes of staff who suddenly recognized her differently now, not as the quiet nurse with a classified past, but as the officer who had been betrayed and vindicated on live television, whose face had been on the national news cycle, whose name appeared in military journals discussing the Bagram evacuation. Her jacket was unbuttoned at the collar, and for the first time since her discharge, her uniform was visible. The faded patch, the one she'd kept sewn inside the lining since Jacksonville, the embroidered insignia of the 75th Ranger Regiment, was now pinned openly to her chest where anyone could see it. She passed the security desk near the staff entrance. Dr. Marcus Caldwell sat there in a Navy Guard uniform, monitoring visitor badges with the kind of meticulous attention that suggested he was trying to disappear into the job. His nameplate read M. Caldwell, Security. The only position the hospital would allow him after his medical license suspension had become official. He didn't look up at first. Then something made him sense her presence, and his eyes rose, and recognition crashed across his face like thunder. Neither of them spoke. 5 seconds stretched. 10. The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical prayer above them, indifferent and eternal. Then Danielle turned away from him with the kind of dismissal that doesn't require words, and she walked to the nurse's station. She reached up to the bulletin board where shift assignments and community announcements had always lived, and she unpinned the unit patch from her jacket lining, the one she'd touched every morning for 18 years like a prayer, the faded embroidered insignia that had meant hidden, dangerous, buried. She pinned it there where everyone could see it. Not as a secret. Not as a shame. As a declaration. The ER seemed to recognize it. Tyler, the patient whose life she'd saved with an improvised chest seal and a voice steady as surgical steel, was visiting the unit, had become a regular, actually, volunteering 3 hours a week, and he raised his coffee cup from Bay 3 in a gesture that might have been a toast. Danielle nodded once. Just once. It was enough. That evening, she found a note in her new office mailbox written in her son Marcus's handwriting, "Proud of you, Mom." Beneath it, on hospital letterhead in different handwriting entirely, was a quote, "True class is what you do when the lights go out." She pinned both next to her computer and got to work, the unit patch glowing softly under the office fluorescence, a small emblem of identity reclaimed. Behind her, beyond the walls of Oak Creek Memorial, Dr. Caldwell processed visitor badges one by one, each badge a reminder that hierarchy is temporary, that power is borrowed, that some soldiers never stop serving even when the world forgets they ever fought. The code held. It always holds. We appreciate every one of you watching. Please hit like if you're enjoying this, subscribe if you want more stories like it, and leave a comment telling us where you're tuning in from.